Okay, our learning is Le'ilei Nishmas Mindel, Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven, her neshama should have an aliyah. Okay, so we're on the bottom of Mem Amud Beis, Amar Rav Zera. 3 lines from the bottom, the fifth to last word, Amar Rav Zera. Okay, Amar Rav Zera. So we've been discussing about different forms of immersing oneself in water on Shabbos. Today is going to be the last day we're discussing this for now. Amar Rav Zera, Ana chazise l'Rabbi Avahu deshat ba'ambate. I saw Ravo seemingly floating in a bathtub on Shabbos. Now, we are certainly talking about a bathtub that is either connected to Chamei Tveria, meaning spring water, or cold water, because as we've discussed, any water that was heated up before Shabbos, that everyone agrees you cannot bathe in on Shabbos, and by the time Ravo comes along, that decree is firmly established. There's no question he is not in hot water. He is in cold water. Again, he's either in cold water or spring water. V'lo yadani akar, ilo akar. But what I was not sure about was he actually floating? In other words, akar, did his feet leave the ground or not? Okay, that's the question that he is not sure. So he sees him floating, he's just not sure if he was floating or not. Pshita, says the Gemara, Pshita lo akar. He certainly did not take his feet off the ground, meaning maybe he was standing in the water, but there's no way, we're on the bottom of Mem Amud Beis, there's no way that he separated his feet from the ground. The tiny we have a brisa. Lo yashut adam b'brecha melei mayim. A person's not allowed to swim in a pool of water. Vafilo amedes b'chatzer, even if it's in an enclosed yard. Okay, so what does that mean? Even if it's an enclosed yard, you certainly cannot go into water when it's in a non-enclosed unenclosed, a place which is not enclosed. Why? Because there, if you splash around the water, you're going to end up carrying the water. You're going to end up taking the water out of the pool meaning the pool may be a Rosh Hashanah, and you're going to if you splash the water, you're going to cause water to go out of the pool into the public place, and that's for sure not allowed. So in other words, to go into a pool of water in any level on Shabbos where there's no Eruv, that's certainly going to be problematic. The Brisa taught us you're not allowed to swim even when there is an Eruv. Afilu menes b'chatzor, even when it's surrounded, you're not allowed to go into. Now, why can't you go into a pool? What's the issue with going to a pool? So again, we can't be talking about water that was hot, because that already we have a decree. So even going into a cold pool, why can't you go into a cold pool? It's a hot day, you're living in Baltimore, it's boiling hot. What would be the issue of going into water? Again, you have an Eruv. What the issue is? The issue is there's a decree which seems a little bit hard to apply to a pool of water, but the decree is that there's a concern when a person goes into a river, there's a concern that a person may go into a river, and they may want to ensure that they're getting across the river. They're swimming, it's not working out so well, so they may go ahead and construct a raft. Okay, I know that seems like very far-fetched between going into a river and building a raft, which in and of itself is difficult, and then applying that to a pool, but there's this general decree, and therefore a person cannot go into anything that is similar to a lake or river, because the concern that a person may want to go ahead and build themselves a raft or a raft of some sorts. So the bottom line is that the Gemara goes back to Rav Zera. Rav Zera said he saw Rabbi Avahu swimming in this bath, and he wasn't sure if he was swimming or if he was just standing in the water. And the Gemara says he certainly wasn't swimming, because we have a decree, you're not allowed to swim. You're not allowed to swim based on this general decree. So the Gemara says, no, lo kasha, there's not a question, meaning Rav Zera was correct for wondering if he was swimming or not. Why? Because we're now at the top of Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, Deleisle Gedude, the case where there is a decree that you're not allowed to go ahead and swim, is in a case where there is no embankment. In other words, the water just goes flush up to the wall. The case where where he was uncertain if Ravohu was swimming or not is where there is an embankment. Okay, so meaning if the whole decree was a person's going to go ahead and create a raft. Now, creating a raft in a pool is extremely odd. That's not a very common thing. But the point is there was a decree in a lake or a river. So anything which is similar to a lake or river, where the water basically just goes up to the walls of the ground, and a pool that's like that, meaning a pool without walls. So you have that, like an infinity pool is certainly like that, where there is no walls, but even sometimes in like fancy places, you have the water going right up to the top. That's going to be part of the decree, where you're not allowed to go into that water whatsoever. Where Rav Zera was uncertain about Rav Avahu was a case where there was a wall. In other words, there's an embankment. You have the water, and then above the water, an inch or two above, was the wall. There, he wasn't sure if he allowed to swim. The halacha is that theoretically you would be allowed. So the bottom line is that's why he wasn't sure if he was swimming or he wasn't swimming, but it's not part of the decree of making a raft, and therefore there would at least be the possibility that he would be swimming in this pool, like our pools, or a typical pool, where the wall is above the water. Halacha lamaisa, practically speaking, you would theoretically be allowed to swim in a pool, again, with cold water. If it was heated up before Shabbos, that would not work. A cold pool you'd be allowed to swim in, but as we pointed out, there is a general prohibition against even going into cold water, even on Shabbos, and therefore be not allowed. And as we spoke about a few days ago, the one thing that would potentially be allowed is putting one's feet, even if hot water that we see that before Shabbos, putting one's feet or one's hands into a pool of water would be permitted. Although one could argue that it's not the most Shabbostic type of thing to do, but technically speaking, that would be permitted on Shabbos. Maybe for young kids, it would presumably be okay. Okay. Now we're going to have another story about, another story about Rav Zera watching his teacher of Avahu and trying to figure out if what he was doing was appropriate or not. In other words, trying to figure out, trying to learn from his Rebbe as his Rebbe was doing something and learn halachos. So again, we're going on a tangent. This is not relevant to Hilchos Shabbos anymore, but it's similar in the sense that Rav Zera was watching his teacher of Avahu and now he's trying to figure out some halacha. So Rav Zera says, Anachazis the Ravahu, Shiniach Yadav Keneged Panav Shalmata. I saw Ravahu when he was bathing in a river. We'll see that's what, although it doesn't say that explicitly, we'll see that's what it's talking about. And he placed his hands over his Panav Shalmata, means his lower face, which means is over his male organ. Okay? V'liyadani inaga ilo naga. I wasn't sure whether I saw him putting his hand in front of his male organ. I wasn't sure whether he touched the male organ or not. Okay, so he saw his hand in front of it. He wasn't sure. Panav Shalmata is a euphemistic way of saying the male organ, and he wasn't sure if he touched the male organ or not. So the Gemara says, Pshita Tlo Naga. It's obvious that he did not touch it. To Tanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kala Oches Ba'ama Umashtin, Ki Ilu Mevi Mabul Olam. A person who holds his male member while urinating is as if the person is bringing a flood to the world. What does that mean? So Chazal learn that the main sin, or one of the main sins of the Dor HaMabul, was not Gezel, as we're often taught, although that's certainly mentioned explicitly in the Torah, but rather it is the fact that they were motzi zer levatal. They wasted seed, and the way a person could waste seed is ultimately if a person is touching their male organ, then that could bring a person to ultimately causing themselves to waste seed, and therefore a person who holds their male organ while urinating is as if they brought a flood into the world, meaning they're following in the footsteps of those who brought a flood to the world. Okay, so that is the brisa. So therefore, the Gemara is saying it's obvious that Rav Zera that Rav Avahu did not touch it, because we see an explicit brisa saying it is forbidden even while urinating. While a person needs to sometimes maneuver, it's still going to be forbidden to touch one's male organ. Okay, so the Gemara gives an answer explaining why he was uncertain. And let's see. Amar Abaye, Asauhu kivosh leshes. It's Rav Avahu understood that the case of his teacher Rav Avahu going out of the river was similar to the case of a troop of marauding soldiers. What does that mean? It's not. We have a mission. It says like this: if you have a troop of soldiers, non-Jewish soldiers, that enter a city, Bishah Shalom, if they enter at the time of peace. In other words, they would march around. They'd go from city to city. If they would enter a city in a time of peace, Chavios Psuchos, Asuros, Stumos Mutaros, then all open barrels. So let's say the soldiers, now what the soldiers would do is they would go from city to city and they would enter the homes. They knock on a door, bang on a door, walk in and be like, we're taking over. Okay, and they walk into a house. Let's say you come into your house and you have barrels of wine. The ones that are closed, okay, psuchos, asurus, tumas, butaros. The ones that are open become forbidden. You have to be concerned that they used any wine from any open barrels, and therefore the barrel be usur. There's a halacha called yain nesach, and any time that a non-Jew pours wine from an open bottle, that wine becomes usur. But if it's a closed bottle, it's not usur, right? So that's why the people who are carrying our bottles of wine that's non-mevushal, there's no issue. But if they handle, but you can't have a non-Jew handling a bottle that's open if it's not mevushal, and it becomes usur. So similarly over here, if they come into your house at time of peace, you have to be concerned that they touched your open bottles, and therefore they become usur. Okay, so that's a general halacha about yain nesach. It's important, by the way, to keep this in mind. We have non-Jewish people helping in our homes. So ideally, a person should put that wine, if you have opened yain, wine that is not mevushal, which is subject to the decree of yain nesach, this form of yain nesach, then it's important to go ahead and put that wine somewhere where it's not going to be handled. If it is, ask a shaila, it's complicated, but the bottom line is ideally it should be put away. Okay. However, here's where we're getting to. B'shas milchama elu ve'elu mutaras. But if they come into your home when there is a war, okay, then even the open bottles are going to be permitted. Why? Because in a time of peace, in a time of war, they're overwhelmed, they're scared, they're running around, they are not going to pour wine during the war. One could argue, maybe they need more wine, whatever, but the bottom line is that because they're scared, there's a principle that we're not going to be afraid. Because, again, what's the idea of that during a war, what's the idea that during a war, open bottles are going to be permitted? The idea is that since they're scared, they're distracted, they're not going to pour themselves the regular libation. So Hachanami, Kevan to be Islo Asile, because his Rebbe, Rabbi Vahu, was in a situation of being scared, of being frightened. Therefore, he may not come to think improper thoughts, and therefore he was wondering, in this situation, which is a frightening situation, maybe it is permitted to go ahead and touch the male organ. So when I ask, what fear is there? Biasusa dinara, the fear of the river. What's the fear of the river? The fear of the river is a person's in a river, rivers are flowing. It's possible a person is going to be drowning, a person could drown, and therefore a person is going to be very careful during that time. And therefore, maybe Rav Avahu was wondering that he saw Rav Avahu putting his hand in front of his male organ. Maybe he was touching it because during a time where a person's in a situation of fearfulness, maybe there you are allowed to touch it, maybe not. He wasn't sure. Okay. So let's go a little further. Fine. The Gemara doesn't answer. We don't know what he did. Ask the Gemara a little further. Aini, is this so? Let's pause for here. Halacha l'maisa, practically speaking, it is forbidden for a person to touch their male organ because the fact that it might come to kishra, it might come to ultimately hardening themselves, and therefore going ahead and being motzi zer l'batzala, wasting seed. It is brought down the Shulchan Aruch. If a person is married and it's a time where it is mutter to be with one spouse, then during that time it is not usher, but otherwise it would be forbidden. It's only the shaft, touching the shaft, that is forbidden. Otherwise, a person's allowed to touch other parts in order to, if they need to manipulate themselves, they're allowed to touch other parts. But otherwise, a person should not be touching those areas because the fact they could lead to kishoy could ultimately lead to wasting seed. Okay, that's the halacha. Aini, ask the Gemara further. Okay, fine. Maybe he wasn't touching. Maybe he was touching. We don't know. Fine. For Amar, but is it possible that he was covering? Now the Gemara is going to question why he was even covering his male organ. V'amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Kol Meniach Yadav Keneged Panav Shel Mata, a person who places his hand over his male organ, not touching it, but just covering it. It's as if the person denies the bris of Avram. In other words, it seems like by covering a person's male organ, it looks like they're embarrassed of their bris. Why else would they be covering it? So you're not allowed to cover your bris. Gemara says no. Lo kasha, no contradiction. Haki nachis. When is it so that a person should not cover their male organ? When they're going down into the river to go to the mikvah, or whatever, go to swim. Because then their back presumably is towards the public, okay? And therefore there'd be no reason to cover their male organ. In other words, let's just read the next line. Haki salik, when a person's going up from the river, then it's okay, then it's appropriate to cover it because of tznius. In other words, the Gemara is saying, when there's an issue of tznius, when there's an issue of modesty, it makes sense to cover it. But in a situation where there's no modesty and you're covering it, it looks like you're just embarrassed, right? So when the person is going down and therefore the people are behind you and they don't see you, so why would you be covering it? Just simply because you're embarrassed of the bris. That's when it's like you're rejecting the bris. But when you're going back up and people see you, then there's the issue of tznius. And now we support this kihad to Rava Shachi. When Rava would go in and out of the river, he would bend over. Okay, so it seems like he's saying that he would not touch it, right? He would not cover it. He would not even cover it because he was concerned, but he would bend over. Rabbi Zera Zakif, Rav Zera would stand straight, not to be ashamed of his bris. Rabbanu Dvei Rav Ashi, the students of Rav Ashi's Beis Medrash, Kikanachis Zakfe, when they went down into the river again, their backs were to everyone, they would stand straight. Kikasalke Shachi, but when they would come up from the river, they would bend over. So you see this idea that there is this difference between going down and going up. Right, going down, there's no embarrassment because people are not typically facing that direction. But when you are going back up, there is idea of some. It's appropriate for tznius, but the ideal thing we see from the students of Rav Ashi is not to cover it, but rather to bend over to kind of maneuver your body in a way that it covers, and therefore that maintains the level of appropriate modesty of tznius. Okay, another story about bathing. Rav Zera. Rav Zera was trying to get away from Rav Yehuda. Okay, Rav Yehuda was his teacher, and he didn't want to bump into his teacher Rav Yehuda. Okay, why not? Rav Zera wanted to make aliyah. He wanted to move to Israel, and he knew that Rav Yehuda was not a fan. Okay, of moving from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Amar Rav Yehuda, Kol ha'olam mi Bavel Eretz Yisrael over ba'aseh. He said that anyone who travels from Bavel and makes Aliyah, moves to Eretz Yisrael, they're in violation of a positive mitzvah. Shneimar, as it says, Bavela yuva'u v'sham yuyu. They will be brought to Bavel, and there they will remain. Okay, so no, he's not Satmar, but the idea is that he felt that there was an Isser of going from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Now, the Rabbi Zera understood that pasuk was not referring to people. The pshat of that pasuk is the kalim, the items that were taken from the base of Mikdash will be brought to Bavel, and they cannot be brought back up. But it's not referring to people; it's referring to the utensils that were taken from the base of Mikdash. So Rav Zera understood I'm allowed to go. However, Rav Zera said, "Ezel ve'eshma minei milsa." I'm so I want to go learn something from my teacher. In other words, he didn't want to bump into his teacher because his teacher was going to yell at him and berate him and tell him that he's doing something wrong by making aliyah. But at the same time, he really wanted to learn something. So he said, before I go, I have to go listen to one more thing. I have to catch him one more time. So where did he go? Okay, the Esav Esek. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to Eretz Yisrael. Azal Ashkei Dekai Vani. He saw him, Rabbi Yehuda, he found him in the bathhouse. And he overheard him speaking to his attendant. Okay, he said like this: Hivili Nesser, Hivili Masreik. Bring me, Nesser is like a type of substance which helps with combing one's hair, and bring me a comb. Okay? Pischu Pumaichu Vapiku Havla. Open your mouths, okay, so you'll inhale steam, so you'll sweat, and you'll discharge heat. Okay? V'ishtu Maya Dvevani, and drink the water of the bathhouse. Okay, that's what he told his attendant. Amar, Rav Zera said, Ilmale Basi El Shmo Davar Dayan. Had I only heard this, Dayena would be enough. In other words, he said, wow, I learned so much. Okay, like Mara's going to unpack. What did he learn? It sounds like he was just telling him some bunch of random things. So it's like this. Bishlam Yuvio Neser Vio Masreik Kamash Malan. He learned when he said, bring me Neser and bring me Masreik. He learned Dvaram Shalchal Mutter LaOmer Lashon HaKodesh. He learned what we just saw quoted a little while ago, not too long ago, and that is that he was speaking in Hebrew. Okay, they're living in Bavel, they're speaking in Hebrew. Clearly you're allowed to speak mundane things in a bathhouse, even though you're speaking B'Lashon HaKodesh. Okay, so he's learning from here, you're allowed to speak Lashon HaKodesh in a bathhouse. In other words, he said those words in that language, so that's the thing he learned there. When he said, open your mouth and inhale the steam, so you'll discharge heat, he will learn from Shmuel. This is something what we learn. This goes like Shmuel. Shmuel havla mapik havla. That heat drives out heat. When a person is inhaling hot steam, it helps them sweat. Okay, and it's important, when you go to bathhouse, you want to sweat, so inhaling steam brings more heat into the body. But this notion of drinking water of the bathhouse, what's the benefit of drinking water of the bathhouse? What is the idea? Titania, and the Gemara answers, we have a brisa. We'll understand. So it says the brisa. A person eats and did not drink afterwards. Eating is like shedding one's blood. Okay, we'll come back to all these statements. And this brings about illnesses of the stomach. The person ate and did not walk afterwards. 4 amos, when you take a small walk, the food rots inside of him. It's important to go on a small walk after eating. And this is the beginning of bad breath. Okay? A person needs to go to the bathroom and nonetheless they eat. It's like a person who heats up an oven on top of its ashes. In other words, we've been speaking until now, you have coals, and you cover the coals with ashes. Let's say you want to make that fire start again. What you normally need to do is you need to scoop out the coals and the ashes and then put new coals in. But if a person goes ahead and while they need the bathroom, they go ahead and they eat, it's like you had an oven, which you cover with ashes, and then you cover with more coals. It's not the normal way to do things, and it's bad for it. And this is the beginning of the odor of someone who sweats. Rachatz b'mayim lo shasa mehen. A person bathed in hot water and does not drink the hot water. This is what we saw from Rabbi Avahu. Dom l'tanu shesikuam bichutz v'lo sikum mifneim. It's like an oven that was heated on the outside but was not heated on the inside. Rachatz b'chamin v'lo nishtatim b'tzon. A person bathed in hot water and did not rinse themselves in cold water. Dom lebarzel shechnisu leor v'lo yichnisu letzon. It's like a person who that took iron and put it in the fire to make like iron, but to not put it in cold water afterwards. Apparently, the process of making iron is after you put it in hot water, you put it in cold, and that strengthens it. Actually, halacha lemaisa, when we do iroi or hagala, or really hagala, ideally, the poskim to bring down, ideally a person should, after doing hagala, should actually put in cold water to kind of strengthen the utensil after koshering it from one status to another. It's not like if you don't do so, it doesn't take away the hagala, but ideally, after doing hagala, you should put in cold water for this reason. Rachatz losach, a person took a bath and did not anoint himself with oil. It's like pouring water on the outside of a barrel. It's like, if you want to fill up a barrel, you fill it up on the inside, don't fill it up on the outside. But if you took a bath, you not like put like soap on, then it's like filling yourself, like it's like pouring water on the outside of the barrel, and it doesn't really do anything. So you need to put the sach, you need to put the oils, the cleaning oils as well. Okay, so that's the simple reading of this brisa. I just want to share with you that Ben Yoyada has a very different read of this entire brisa, understands it all, not just practically in terms of medical health and all that, but rather understands that this is all a metaphor. And he says like this, he says, eating is typically, it proves from a number of sources, eating is considered Torah Shabiksav, drinking is Torah Shabal Peh, the oral law. So he says a person who eats, meaning they have Torah Shabiksav, and they don't have Torah Shabal Peh, then that is something which is going to cause a person illness, because it's going to cause major issues, because if you don't have the ability to interpret the Torah properly, it's going to cause problems. He actually points out that the Gemara says the term the Gemara uses is achilaso dam. It brings about blood. And he points out, again, this is a little mystical, but the word aleph, we call ourselves Adam. The idea aleph is that there's a certain hiddenness, that everything that what makes a human unique is the fact that there's elements that are not always explicit. There's parts which are in our mind, parts which are not written down, and the Torah Shabbat Peh is associated with the letter aleph, which is a silent word. It's a word where it doesn't make a sound. The idea is that a person is just dam, there's no aleph, there's none of the hiddenness that's connected to it, and that's the idea of dam, okay? Ultimately destroys the soul. A person eats and did not walk for amos, he says it means a person who eats and did not say the 4 brachos of Birkas Hamazon, okay? And then the idea of a person going to the bathroom and eating doesn't mean eating food, but rather means Torah. A person who does not learn Torah, a person who learns Torah while they need the bathroom is you're mixing Kodesh v'chol. It's important that we separate. We go to the bathroom and we daven, go to the bathroom and we learn. We don't mix Kodesh and Chol. It's important to be able to separate the two. And then the idea of a person having hot water and not cold water means a person who learns Torah Shabbat Peh, but does not bring it hot water, but does not bring it back to the cold water, i.e. Torah Shabbat Ksav. The idea is that, as you see throughout the Gemara, the Amoraim are always trying to bring the Torah Shabbat Peh back to Psukim. In other words, we want to always show the connection between the two. And then the idea of a person going to the bath, and this is the main one, a person goes to the bath and does not drink from the water. What that means is you have people, I think I must have shared the story, but I'll share it again. And my father once, he told me that he used to go visit the hospital. He lived in Israel. I grew up in Israel, not too long after the Holocaust. He was born right after the Holocaust. And he remembers going to visit the hospital once on Shabbos. He would go every Shabbos to visit the hospital, visit sick people. And he saw this guy in the waiting room smoking a cigarette, which was normal back in the day in a hospital because cigarettes were healthy. But basically, he was smoking a cigarette, and on Shabbos, fine. He's walking by the guy, and he looks and he sees the guy's holding a Gemara. He says, "What are you doing?" He says, "What are you looking for?" He says, "It's a great book." "What do you mean? What am I doing?" "It's a great book." Obviously, the guy was a survivor or whatever it was. Went off the he did not hold on to his faith, but he loved Gemara. That's the idea of a person's in the bath, the boiling bath. They're learning the water, but they're not drinking it. They're not taking it in. It's basically just learning it. It's interesting, but it's not actually penetrating them. It's not making a difference. That's the idea of a person in the hot bath, but not actually drinking the water. And the idea of not putting on sach, not putting on the oil of the ointment, is a person who learns the Torah but is not oil, and he proves from a number of sources refers to Yira. The Gemara Brachos has extensive discussion about the fact that a person who learns Torah but does not have Yira Shemayim, none of it actually makes a difference. It doesn't actually penetrate the person. So again, when we learn, the idea is we have to take something practical out of it. We also have to make sure that we have Yira Shemayim in order for our Torah to last with us, and we will pick up tomorrow. It's a short Amud on the next stop, so we stop a little early, so we have a little more time tomorrow. Have a great day.